Welcome to the Altered Call podcast. This week we'll be listening to part of an interview that I did with a member of my small group. Ronnie has been attending group for about a year and has aggressively reoriented his life in the last 6 months as he has decided to take these ideas more seriously. I hope that you enjoy the conversation. If you are interested in the entire uncut interview, that will be available at the Altered Call YouTube page.
Hi, good morning, Ronnie. How are you doing?
Doing great. I'm glad to be here, Alex, man. It's good to see you.
Good. The plan today, obviously you've been a member of our group for a while now. I've been really impressed with your development, with your story, and I just kind of wanted to get it out there. So the goal today is just to talk through the last couple months and what you've been doing and how that's been working in your life.
Sounds great.
That's going to be the plan. Just to start us out, can you give us a little bit of your background? Who are you? What do you do? Where are you from?
My name is Ronnie Austin Brammer. I'm from Arkansas, but currently I live in Kiowa. I have an awesome wife. Her name is Mandy. Best decision I ever made was asking her to marry me, that's for sure. I got 4 kids. They are 12, 10, and 5'3". Lorelei, Phineas, Oakley, and Spurgeon, named after Charles Haddon Spurgeon, my favorite revivalist. But yeah, we live out in Kiowa, and it's kind of on a ranch. So we have some like cows and chickens, and we run a dog ranch. We got all these dogs. I'm constantly covered in dog hair, and we have lots of eggs. But that's kind of my life. I'm a home inspector. That's what I do professionally. I've been in the construction business my whole life. And I think to kind of understand my story, I grew up in Rudy, Arkansas, which is like a tiny community, part of the Fort Smith, Northwest Arkansas, River Valley metro area. Little town of 72 people. That's where my grandparents bought property. My dad lives there now. My grandparents live next door. They bought the other house next door. It's kind of like a compound. Family is really important. It's a living, breathing Jeff Foxworthy joke, the Brammer compound. Seriously, it's like old cars in the yard and an old bus and double wide in between. Anyways, growing up there is most of my memories of my childhood. But I lived with my mom, which was in a neighboring town that was kind of bigger. So I was kind of a city kid, country kid at the same time. And even though I grew up in the Bible Belt, I wasn't churched. My parents didn't go to church. They didn't take me to church. Only time I ever went to church is when my stepdad took us to mass. And so that was kind of my experience of church, was occasionally going to mass and then getting invited to like VBS or some kids thing by a neighbor. And those are great, but they're kind of like a carnival. You know, it's like cotton candy, bubblegum, pizza, some sort of puppet show. And so my understanding of what church was that. And there's nothing wrong with that stuff necessarily. Like I love great children's ministries. I love VBS. But when they don't have Jesus, gospel elements, or the Holy Spirit is not there, that can be a problem. And I think just as a kid experiencing some of those things, I didn't really understand what the church was or how it was supposed to function. First church I went to, actually, I rode my bike there because my parents weren't going to church, right? And so I had these questions about reality that were crippling. Like, I was having panic attacks at 9, 10 years old. I didn't know it at the time, but that's what I was experiencing because of, at the time, I had questions about the vastness of just the universe. Like, it was so big that it crushed my little soul, and I felt like panic because of it. And I had these questions about reality that just weren't being answered. And I thought church might be a place to figure that out.
I want to pause here for a second because I actually knew the bike story. I did not know any of the panic tied to that. Like, what, as you said you were 9 or 10 at the time.
Yeah.
What, as a 9 or 10-year-old, led you to believe that riding your bike to a church would have any impact?
I had questions like, okay, I know Rudy is in Arkansas, and I know Arkansas is in America, and I know America is in the world, and I know the world is in the solar system. I know that there's other stuff outside of that space, but I don't really know what it is or understand it. And then what's outside of that? That terrified me. And I would think like God was putting the gravity of eternity in my heart, and I didn't know what to do with it. And the only place I could think of to go try to figure that out was church. Because like I said, I'd been to some church events and had heard about God, but didn't really understand him, and thought, man, that's got to be the place where I can figure it out. And I'd never really been to a church service necessarily. I'd just been to, well, I guess mass, but that's a little bit different than the contemporary evangelical model of Sunday mornings. So I don't know how to answer that question other than that was the inclination in my heart. And I think God put it there. Like, that's the only way I can answer that, is that the Holy Spirit probably tugged on my heart and said, hey, why don't you try going to church? So I rode my bike to the local mega church that was in my neighborhood. And I show up and they're like, hey, who are you? And I'm like, hi, I'm Austin. That's my middle name. And in Arkansas, that's kind of what I go by. It's my family name. And they go, great. Who are your parents? And I'm like, Steve and Lynn. And they're like, where are they? I'm like, they're in bed. And they're like, well, how did you get here? I was like, I rode my bike. They were like, okay, I guess check yourself in and out. And here's kids' church, check it out. And so
we were very different at the respective ages.
yeah.
I would not have done any of that.
This is like in 92 too. So I mean, we were a little bit looser with like check-in protocol and whatnot. But I started going to that church just on my bike. I didn't really get my questions answered, but on my third attempt to go, the neighbors saw me and they were like, hey, where are you going on your bike? And I'm like, I'm going to church. And they were like, you want to go with us? And I was like, sure, why not? And so I hopped in their van and just started going to church with them. And it was a fundamental, very conservative Southern Baptist SBC church. God bless them. They tried their best, but there was probably a little bit of damage done there. I'm not sure. I was young, and that church went through a split. In my young mind, I was like, oh, kind of like my parents got a divorce. So church is similar to that. And then the next church I went to was the Methodist church that I was involved with Boy Scouts in. And the reason I went there is because I was an orphan. I didn't have parents that went to these institutions with me. I was there alone. And so when there was a split, I kind of got lost in the shuffle. And that happened at the second place I went to. They had a split there too. And there was a scandal, actually. The senior pastor did some things, and that's kind of why the church split. And at that point, I had just kind of given up. I was like 15, 16, and I was kind of like, church is dumb. There's no answers here. This isn't giving me what I thought it would give me. And I moved out of my mother's house of that metropolitan area and moved into Rudy with my dad and started going to a small school. So I was at a big 5A school and I went down to a 2A school. And that was a different breed of folk. I mean, they were country folk, redneck country folk. I got exposed to things that I kind of hadn't been exposed to before. And one of those things was like, that's why I started drinking at 17, was with one of my buddies. And it was great. I was like, oh man, this magical elixir kind of numbs those questions, numbs those anxiety. It releases a lot of inhibition and it makes me this fun, wild, wacky guy that everybody loves. And that was great for about like a year until I almost like ruined my life at the age of 17. I got into a lot of trouble and I kind of ran away from that. When I graduated, I decided to get out of town and I went to like the local state school, which was about 2 hours away. And I proceeded to major. The major I selected was partying my face off. And I was so good at it that after a semester and a half, they were like, you know what? You can go back home. And so there I was. Yeah, you're good. You're good. You can go back home. Just go be a redneck. And so when I came back to Rudy, I started wanting to hang out with my old friends. And the guy that introduced me to drinking, and I feel comfortable talking about this because he would feel comfortable talking about this. He wasn't partying. He was going to church. And that's because he met a girlfriend who he was going to marry. And she was dragging his butt to church because she wouldn't tolerate that nonsense.
That is sometimes how he does that.
Yeah. And I was like, bro, you're not fun anymore. This girl is running. He's like, no, bro, church is great. You should come. And they really are good people. And I was like, dude, I've tried that and it was terrible. I don't want to be involved. So he told me, come to youth group. I was 19. He's like, come to youth group. There's free pizza. And I had smoked some weed that day and I was coming down. So I kind of had the munchies and I was like, hey, free pizza. That sounds great. So I show up to this youth group meeting for the free pizza. I'd smoked just a couple hours earlier. And I meet this missionary named Bella Eid. He was a Frenchman that was a missionary to Nigeria, I believe. And he talked about Jesus like he was alive. He talked about God like he was real. And I was like, whoa, all those questions I had, I think this guy might have some answers. And so I got connected to that church. It was great. They really loved me, even though I was an orphan, even though I wasn't part of the family, they accepted me. And that's one thing that church did really, really well, was loving people and seeing people and meeting them where they were at. Unfortunately, like most churches, especially in the South, discipleship, specifically for men, was kind of a weak point. And so as long as I showed up on Sunday, it was assumed I was all right. So I had this pattern in my mind that kind of developed. Because what happened is, after that initial like honeymoon phase of being there, so by the time I was 21, what was happening is I was showing up Sunday hungover, feeling bad about my decisions, thinking I'm going to do better. And then things would be great for a couple days, but the closer it got to the weekend, the more there would be that pull to go do whatever. And I would just repeat that cycle over and over and over again. And by the time I was 22, I realized that wasn't going to work anymore. And I had the opportunity to move to Colorado because my youth pastor at that church was from Colorado. And he went through this program at a mega church out there. And he had been taking our youth group there every year. And I'd been going. And I loved it. It was awesome. I had these great spiritual highs when I was there. But I kept fighting. I was in that cycle, man. I just couldn't get out of it. And so he convinced me in 2006, I was 22 years old, to move to Colorado. That was great. I finally got some of the freedom and breakthrough I was looking for, but it was all based on, and I'm looking back at it now, it makes sense to me. I was bootstrapping my way through it. I'd gotten to a new place. I'd gotten away from the old friends. I'd gotten away from the old environment. And when I was there, I could do pretty good. And it was great. I was towing the line, and the program I was in, it had certain regulations of behavior that you had to adhere to be in the program, of which was like no drinking, no smoking, no extramarital sex. You couldn't be married and be part of the program. You had to be single. You had to have a job. You had to pray a certain amount every week. So we had prayer meetings we were required to go to. We had to read the Bible a certain amount every week. And we had an accountability group that we would go through all of these things to make sure that we were adhering to the standard. That program was awesome. It was great. I don't think they did everything right. I don't think we did everything right, but the heart was to try to disciple. It was a discipleship program. We were trying to disciple young people and trying to build a prayer movement. And there's a lot of people that had success in that program. There's other people that have a lot of hurt from that program. I was fortunate to just catch the right relationships while I was there. And the program was an awesome experience for me. And I was there for 6 years. So I started out as just a lowly intern. Because I was 22, I was older than most of the interns that were there. Most of them were like 18 or 19. Because I was 22, I could legally drive the vans that, for insurance purposes, I could drive our tour vans. So all of a sudden, we were doing. There was a worship ministry out of this mega church that was national, and so we would take some of our bands on the road to do prayer meetings and worship nights at local churches across the country. And I started out driving vans for them. I got into production, so I was like a tech in a sense. I did sound work, I gaffed things, just whatever was needed. I would stack chairs, whatever, and I kind of worked my way to bring value to the program. And eventually, they brought me on as a like volunteer staff member. During that whole time, when I was there, I was towing the line. But if I went back home, I would get loose. And I would party a little bit with old friends, but then I'd feel bad and come back and get back on the wagon. And so there was this oscillation that continued during that season. And I carried a lot of guilt and shame because of that. And I made a lot of mistakes. And there were times that I would have to repent to my leaders, like, hey, I kind of screwed up over break. This is what I did. And they would go through restoration process stuff with me. But it's not the program's fault. It was my approach. I was approaching it legalistically because I didn't know any other way. And a lot of my church experience from my youth, I was imprinting onto that space. I don't know how to explain it any better than that, other than I was being a knucklehead. Then I met Mandy, and she really helped me navigate a lot of the more quirky things about my personality. And I started to grow because I had this amazing woman that was partnering with me. Right when I met Mandy, that's when my little sister passed away. She was 20 years old. She passed away in an accident. It was a spring break incident. And that rocked my world. That really messed me up. I had to walk with my mother through the loss of her daughter. And by that time, my stepdad and her were divorced. And so I kind of had to be the support for her and myself and the rest of my family. And because I was at a discipleship school, there was a lot of pressure put on me to be like, who's going to pray? Ronnie Austin, you want to pray? So my family was looking to me just because I was in the discipleship school. Oh, he must be spiritual and know what to do. And so I had to carry a lot of that. Don't fault my family for that at all. It's just how we survived that season. It was terrible. It was terrible. She's the only daughter on that side of my mom's family, and it's like we lost our princess, and it jacked us up forever. We haven't got back to what that was. I don't think we ever will. And that's a whole nother conversation about grief and everything. But that's how I started ministry, was out of tragedy. While I was at this institution, we had a pastor scandal. Our pastor was caught in an immoral situation and was asked to step down. There was a shooting at our church. We had to bury 2 of our students who got shot in the parking lot. That was kind of my early ministry experience, was seeing a church go through tragedy, seeing a church go through transition. And it was different than what I experienced back home, because they honestly did it pretty well. I grew through that, but after being on staff for 2 years, I've been there for a total of 6 years. I was on staff for 2 years, 2 of those years. My wife and I moved to Portland, where we went to another megachurch. And as soon as we got there, the pastor got diagnosed with cancer and had to step down. And so again, we were on part of the leadership team for one of the campuses there. We were there helping navigate that place through. We were part of that transition period. I guess the point I'm trying to make here is, whenever you commit to a church body, of course there's going to be messiness. Of course there's going to be pain. There's going to be terrible tragedy. And unfortunately, sometimes your leaders are going to let you down. Sometimes people are going to let you down. But I think that's why we're there, is because it is a broken world. It is messy.
I feel like, I obviously know a lot about your story, but even in this, I've picked up a few new elements. You've been through an awful lot of church hurt and church adjacent hurt.
Grossness, yeah.
Qualify, whatever that is. Why have you chosen to stick with the faith? I feel like a lot of people would have said, this is all crazy nonsense. I don't want to deal with this anymore.
That is a great question. I think, and this goes back to the.
I'm not saying you're wrong.
No. I think
a lot of people would have said, this is dumb. I'm over this.
Dude, when I was a kid, I didn't. Oh man, I'm not bashing my parents, all right, but I didn't have a whole lot of help to figure out life. I had to do it on my own. I had to bootstrap it, and so I took that mentality. I brought that with me into my faith, and that's why I got caught up in legalism so much. The do's and the don'ts, and grit your teeth and figure it out on your own. And so it didn't matter what was thrown at me. It was just like, I'm gonna keep plowing along. I think that's the best way I can answer that question.
Did you find that structure reassuring? Was it a structure that you would? Not a lot of people are drawn to legalism.
There is some comfort in the prescriptive checklist. If I do these things, I'm good. And when I don't do these things, I'm bad. But that's what keeps you coming back to the checklist. I think I would say that's probably the best way I could describe it.
I was just curious.
No, that's a great question. Interestingly enough, through my connections at the internship program, I got offered a youth pastor position in Castle Rock, and moved to Castle Rock. And there, I had a pastor. His name is Mark Marble, and that man put a lot of effort into trying to disciple me and shape me. And I probably think it was the first time I'm in a lot of my experience that I had individual discipleship on that level from a man that was twice my age. That he taught me a lot. He taught me a lot and shaped a lot of my character as it is today. But we didn't get along. There's a lot of times that we bucked heads, and it's just because I had these hard mentalities and thoughts about church and the way it should be done that I think were wrong, and we kind of butt heads on that. Whenever I moved there to that church, we got there on April 1st, 2015. On August 8th of that same year, my birthday, just a couple of months later, 6 months later, his wife died of stage 4 ovarian cancer, which that was, I'm a young youth pastor. I'm trying to figure out the ropes of how to like disciple and mentor young people. And I'm using the playbook that I was given from the 90s evangelical church models, right? And within a couple of months, I'm already dealing with, like, whenever that happened, Mark was man, that was like the darkest day of his life. Fortunately, I'd been through a couple of those with my own mother. I'd been through that with different leaders at the churches I'd had experience with. So I had some like tools in my tool belt. I know how much you hate that. I had some experience in walking those dark roads. And so I was just there to support him in that season. And also during that time, one of the students I had pastored at the internship program, he committed suicide. We had another student that was in our ministry at that time that committed suicide. And if you remember this part of the story, the youth pastor that convinced me to move to Colorado in the first place, he committed suicide. And so within that 5-year period, those were pretty heavy events. I distinctly remember each of those events and feeling like I'm walking with someone. Their life, this day, there's not going to be another day worse than this. Burying their son. Not going to be a worse day. It doesn't matter what happens. Like, this is the worst. I was there for a couple of those, for a couple of different people. And I was failing as a youth pastor for sure. We were terrible. We tried our best, but we just were not very good. And after that suicide of our own student, I was like, forget this. Forget the playbook. Forget everything I know. Like, we're just going to try to take care of people. And I kind of got this mentality of church should be a social justice, community loving, community center thing. And we tried that. And it was actually pretty successful. But then COVID happened. And when COVID happened, I hung up the proverbial smock, retreated to Kiowa, and kind of said, and this is back, whenever I was a kid, I said, forget church, it's dumb. I kind of said the same thing. It was like, this is dumb. I'm done. Ministry is stupid. It's obviously not effective at all, at least the way that we're doing it. I'm just going to try to be a churchgoer guy, help out where I can, but I'm definitely not going to consider being spiritually responsible for people anymore. I just don't have the capacity. And that's kind of where some of the old bad habits started slipping back in. That's where I started to lose a little bit of control of the things I was bootstrapping for so long. I think everyone during the COVID year picked up a couple bad habits, but I certainly started drinking a lot more, started not really caring about spiritual practices. Like I said, forget the checklist. Like, I wasn't praying. I wasn't reading the Bible. I was kind of over it. And that's where the legalism path ends, I think, is in your doing, it's never good enough. This is one thing we did at the internship. We asked people to sign a vow. And the vow had 4 principles on it. One is, I'm going to spend time with God every day. Another is, I'm going to fast something once a week. Another is, I'm going to live a lifestyle that's holy and consecrated to the Lord. And the last one was, I'm going to be on mission with my life. I love all those principles. I love them all. The way I approached it was signing this contract. Therefore, I know what I should do. And once I sign the contract, I'm going to do that and everything's going to be good. But inevitably, I would mess it up. I would fail. I was setting myself up for failure because there's no way I could I was setting a standard for myself that I could not keep because it was on my own strength.
The guilt multiplier on
it. Yeah. And that kept me coming back for sure. While I was in Kiowa, we actually got the opportunity to serve just as a sound guy. Just as a sound guy, serving a local church. The worship experience was not what we were used to. Wasn't super like polished. There were no instruments on the stage, and that was from their 80s. Like that's something they adopted in the 80s. Like, we're not going to have instruments on the stage, and they just kept it into 2000. And I met with the worship pastor, and I was like, "Bro, what are your goals here? Because I can help you, but we may have to change some things." And I had the opportunity to serve there in a really like non-pastoral, non-responsible, just be there and serve. And it was actually really healthy. It was really healthy because the expectation was I was just a volunteer. Just show up if you can. If you don't, there's a lot of grace. And we ended up doing some really cool things at that church. Like, all those things I learned, they weren't for naught. All those experiences, all those things I learned, I ended up bringing with me into that place. But I still was in this dark cycle of not breaking through. And mainly it was the alcoholism. It was just becoming a problem. And I knew I had a problem in like 2020, 2021, because I took one of those online tests. Do I have an alcohol problem? And it told me I did. And I was like, well, I'm going to fix this. And so I bootstrapped my way through it and just like, I'm not going to drink, and that worked for a little while. But the core belief down in my soul, and this is specifically about alcohol, was wrong. For me, it was wrong. And I didn't know that. And so I was fighting a battle that I was never going to win until that core belief had changed. But there was no way for that core belief to change until some other things had to change that I hadn't dealt with ever during that whole process. And so that's around the time I met you. My wife said, "Hey, I feel like the Lord is telling us to move." And that was just about a year and a half ago. And I was like, okay. And whenever she talks, usually I consider that maybe the Holy Spirit. Odds are it is. I better listen to it. And if not, that's okay. I still made her happy. So it's like a win-win. So we started going to the church that you guys were at. So I met you and Ron and got involved with the men's group you guys were leading. And there was something different about the approach of the group that really caught my interest. The way I would describe it is most of the experiences I had in discipleship in the past were either very flippant, like non-intentional. Just like, "Hey guys, how are you doing? Good. Are you good? I'm good. Good. You good? Okay, we're good. Great. All right. So let's talk about the football game." Or it was very prescriptive. Like, did you do this, that, or the other or not? Or it was a book club. Or it was a mix of some of that. The first night I sat down with you, I heard guys, it wasn't like we're going through the checklist or we're going through the book club. Guys were just sharing what was on their heart because Jesus put it there. That's kind of what I saw. And it felt a little bit different than some of the things that I experienced in the past. Let me say this. The program I was in, fantastic people. I love them to death. I think we did the best we could with what we had. And sure, there's a lot of things I would do differently. And I'm not trying to knock the process that we had at the time. But I think today, 2025, where the church in the West is at today, that model doesn't work. It just doesn't.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Altar Call Podcast. Before you go, I want to make you aware of our new YouTube page. There I will post a weekly update where I discuss the most recent episode of the podcast in more detail and tease information that is coming in future episodes. Feel free to like and subscribe here, there, and everywhere if you're finding value exploring these ideas. You can reach me by email using alex@alteredcall.com, or you can visit the website for additional information.